At 9:47 p.m. on a Friday night, three ships the size of football stadiums dropped out of the clouds over Chicago's Southside, and not one person called the police. They called their cousins instead. Somewhere over an empire that had erased 41 worlds without losing a single soldier, a fleet commander was about to learn the one lesson no alien race had ever survived long enough to teach. There is a difference between conquering a planet and conquering a block party. Earth had cities that surrendered politely. Chicago was not going to be one of them. This is the story of how an invasion force with antimatter cannons got stopped cold by a corner store, a barber shop, and one grandmother with an extension cord. Stick around, because in about 2 minutes, things get loud. Smash that like, drop a comment if you already know somebody like these characters. Subscribe and help us in reaching our first 1,000 subscribers, because this story is just getting started. The south side of Chicago doesn't sleep early on a Friday. By 9 o'clock, the corner of 63rd and King Drive was doing exactly what it always did. Marcus Webb stood outside Big Tony's corner store with a bag of chips in one hand and his phone in the other, arguing with his cousin Darnell about whether the Bulls had any shot this season. Darnell didn't think so. Marcus thought Darnell was an idiot. This conversation had been going on in one form or another for about 11 years. Inside the store, Tony himself was behind the counter, watching a small television bolted to the wall. Half paying attention to a baseball game, and half paying attention to the four teenagers debating whether a bag of Flamin' Hot Cheetos counted as a meal. Tony had run this store for 22 years. He had seen blackouts, riots, blizzards, and one extremely memorable incident involving a runaway horse from a parade. He believed with total confidence that he had seen everything a Friday night could throw at him. He had not seen this. The first sign was the streetlights. They didn't flicker. They didn't dim. They simply bent, all of them on the block, like the light itself was being pulled sideways by something enormous passing overhead. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. Darnell, 300 miles away on a video call, asked what was wrong. Marcus didn't answer. He was looking up. The cloud cover over the south side peeled apart like someone had unzipped the sky, and three shapes came down through the gap, black and angular, each one easily the length of 3 city blocks. They didn't move like aircraft. They moved like something that had never needed to ask permission to be somewhere. No engine roar, no rotor wash, just a low hum that made the windows of every parked car on the street rattle in their frames at once. Tony walked out from behind the counter, past the chip aisle, past the teenagers who had gone completely silent, and stood in his own doorway staring up at the sky like the rest of the block. "Tony," Marcus said, phone still in his hand, Darnell's voice still tiny and confused coming out of the speaker. "Please tell me that's a blimp." "That ain't no blimp," Tony said. One of the three ships banked low over the rooftops and settled into a hover above the old Lincoln Park lot 2 blocks down. The empty stretch of cracked asphalt where neighborhood kids played pickup basketball on milk crates set up as hoops. Dust kicked up in a perfect ring beneath it. Somewhere behind Marcus, a car alarm started going off, then another, then a whole chorus of them, triggered by something none of their sensors had a name for. A panel on the underside of the hovering ship split open, and a ramp extended down to the cracked asphalt with a sound like a vault door unlocking. Marcus lifted his phone and started filming. Around him, half the block was doing the same thing. Nobody ran. This would later be the detail that confused the invaders more than almost anything else. On every world the Drevoth Dominion had ever taken, the first instinct of the local population had been to flee. Here, in this specific 4-block radius of Chicago, the first instinct of the local population was to get a better angle for the video. 6 figures came down the ramp. They stood roughly 7 feet tall, encased in matte gray armor that looked like it had been grown rather than built, with elongated limbs and faceless helmets that reflected the streetlights in long amber streaks. At the front of the group walked a 7th figure, taller still, armor edged in a deep red that marked him as something more than a soldier. His translator crackled to life, broadcasting in flat, accented English to every device within half a mile. Piggybacking on radio and cellular signals like it had been built specifically, to make sure nobody could claim later that they hadn't been warned. "People of this settlement, I am Fleet Commander Drassic Vorhane of the Drevoth Dominion. Your world has been selected for incorporation. Resistance has been calculated and found to be statistically irrelevant. Lay down any weapons and remain in your dwellings. Compliance will be rewarded. Non-compliance will not be tolerated. There was a silence on the block that lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then somebody's grandmother, watching from a second-floor window with her arms crossed over a housecoat, yelled down into the street the only response that made any sense to her. "Boy, get off my court." The teenagers outside Tony's store started laughing. Marcus kept filming. And 4 blocks away, in a barber shop that had not closed before midnight on a Friday since the Clinton administration, a man named Andre Pierce looked up from the chair he was cutting hair in, glanced at the television mounted above the mirrors that was now playing the exact same broadcast on every local channel simultaneously, and set down his clippers. "All right," Andre said to no one and everyone. "We finishing this haircut later." Within minutes, phones across the South Side were lighting up with the same message in a dozen different group chats, the modern version of smoke signals. "Aliens on 63rd. Aliens by the park, you seeing this? Bro, come outside." The message moved faster than the Dominion's own communications protocols, faster than anything Commander Vorhain's intelligence division had modeled. Because nobody had ever bothered to model a neighborhood that had survived gentrification scares, 3 different mayors, and a Bears rebuild by becoming very good at organizing itself in under 10 minutes. Vorhain did not know any of that yet. He stood at the base of the ramp, scanning the rooftops and the dark windows. The dozens of glowing phone screens pointed at him from porches and doorways and parked cars. And for the first time since this campaign had begun, a small diagnostic flag appeared in the corner of his visor that his translator did not have a word for. It was the closest thing his species had to confusion. "Sensors are reading elevated heart rates across the population," his lieutenant reported through the comm, "but minimal flight response." "Commander, they are not running." Vorhain looked out at the street, at Marcus still filming, at Tony standing calm in his doorway, at the grandmother now leaning further out her window with what looked very much like a phone of her own. "Curious," Vorhain said. "Proceed with the demonstration." He raised one armored hand toward Big Tony's corner store, and that was the moment the South Side decided this was personal. Commander Vorhain's demonstration was supposed to be simple. A single low-yield pulse aimed at the storefront, enough to blow out the windows and the sign, enough to prove a point without killing anyone, calculated to inspire fear without inspiring martyrs. It had worked on 11 other worlds. The pulse fired. It tore through the front window of Big Tony's corner store, shattered the glass into the street, and obliterated the hand-painted sign that had hung there since 2003. The one that read Tony's, "Cold drinks, lotto, we take EBT." Inside the store, Tony watched his sign die in real time through the security camera feed on his phone. The same feed he'd been streaming live to 40 people in his neighborhood watch group, chat without even meaning to. He did not look afraid, he looked offended. "That sign was hand-done," Tony said. "My daughter painted that sign when she was 12. Marcus, still filming from across the street, felt something shift in the air that had nothing to do with the smoke curling up from the broken window. It was the same feeling he got right before a fight broke out at a cookout, the half-second of silence where everybody already knows what's about to happen. Tony walked back inside his own store, stepped over the broken glass, and emerged 30 seconds later, holding an aluminum baseball bat. He kept behind the counter for reasons he had never previously needed to explain to anyone. "Sir," Vorhain's lieutenant said carefully, watching the readout, "the structure owner is approaching." "He is unarmed," Vorhain said, watching Tony cross the street with the bat resting on his shoulder like he was walking up to take batting practice. "That is a primitive striking implement, not a weapon." "Understood, Commander." Tony walked directly up to the nearest soldier, a 7-foot wall of gray armor that outweighed him by what looked like 400 pounds, and pointed the bat at the broken window behind him. "You owe me a sign," Tony said, the soldier's helmet tilted, processing. Vorhain, 20 feet away, watched with the same detached curiosity he'd watched the heart rate data with. This was new. No subject population in 11 prior campaigns had ever opened negotiations by demanding compensation. "This world's structures will be repurposed under Dominion authority," the soldier said through its translator. "Compensation is not applicable." Tony swung the bat. It connected with the side of the soldier's helmet with a crack that echoed down the block, and the soldier staggered sideways 2 full steps before catching itself against the doorframe. The armor held. The dent did not care. For the first time in the entire campaign, a Drevoth soldier had been physically struck by an unarmed civilian and visibly knocked off balance. The street erupted. Marcus's phone caught all of it. The teenagers who'd been arguing about Cheetos 5 minutes earlier were now sprinting toward the parked cars, not away from the fight, but toward whatever they could find. A guy named Reggie who lived 2 doors down came out onto his porch, holding a tire iron he kept for exactly this kind of unspecified emergency. Somewhere behind them, the grandmother in the housecoat had disappeared from her window, which everyone on the block who knew her understood was a far more concerning development than anything happening with the aliens. Multiple hostiles approaching, the lieutenant reported, voice climbing half an octave. Commander, this was not in the projection. Vorhain raised a hand, and 4 more soldiers fanned out from the ship's ramp to support the one Tony had just dented. They moved with the calm precision of an army that had never lost a foothold on a single world, weapons raised, formation tight, every protocol exactly as trained. The protocol had never accounted for Reggie. Reggie did not slow down, did not announce himself, did not do anything that the Dominion's tactical computer would have recognized as a combat approach. He simply walked up behind the soldier nearest the ramp and hit him across the back of the knees with the tire iron. The exact way he'd seen it done in 100-bar fights he'd either started or finished over the years. The soldier's leg joint, built for a planet with different gravity and different ideas about structural stress, buckled in a direction Drevoth engineering had not designed for. The soldier went down. 3 more residents poured off the surrounding porches, none of them coordinated. None of them following any plan beyond their own personal grievance against an army that had just shot up their corner store. A woman swung a folding chair. A man in pajama pants through a brick he'd apparently been keeping in his car for reasons that suddenly made perfect sense. Somewhere in the chaos, Marcus heard Tony shouting at the soldier he'd dropped. Something about the sign again, something about respect, and underneath all of it, the low building rumble of more people coming, more doors opening, more porches emptying out. Vorhain watched his 5-soldier demonstration squad get physically overrun by unarmed civilians in under 90 seconds, and the diagnostic flag in his visor flashed again, brighter this time. "Lieutenant," he said slowly, "pull the squad back to the ship." "Sir, that would suggest retreat from—" "It is not retreat," Vorhain said. "It is recalibration." The soldiers withdrew up the ramp, dragging the one Reggie had dropped, and the ramp sealed shut behind them with a hiss that sounded to everyone watching. Exactly like an apology nobody had asked for. On the street below, Tony stood in front of his ruined storefront, breathing hard, bat still in hand, and looked at the small crowd that had gathered around him. Marcus lowered his phone just long enough to catch his cousin's eye. "Darnell," Marcus said into the speaker, "you still don't think we got a shot this season?" From 300 miles away, Darnell's voice came back small and stunned. "Bro, are you fighting aliens right now?" "We knocked one down," Marcus said. "Tony hit one with a bat." Behind him, sirens were starting in the distance, but not police sirens. Something older, slower, a sound the whole neighborhood recognized instantly. Somebody had pulled the alarm at the old volunteer fire station 2 blocks over, the one that hadn't been used for anything but parade routes in 15 years. And people were already starting to move toward it, drawn by habit and instinct toward the one place in the neighborhood that had always meant gather here. Something's wrong. Up in the hovering ship, Commander Vorhain reviewed the footage of his retreat in silence, the diagnostic flag still blinking in the corner of his vision, refusing to clear. He had conquered 11 worlds. None of them had a corner store. By the time the old fire bell stopped ringing, the Southside had assembled something that no military academy in the galaxy would have recognized as a defense force, and something every person standing in that lot recognized immediately as a neighborhood. There were no uniforms, there was no rank structure. There was a barber named Andre Pierce who had walked out of his shop still wearing his cutting apron, a pair of clippers shoved into his back pocket out of pure habit. There was Tony, bat in hand, a streak of dried blood from a glass cut on his forearm that he hadn't noticed yet. There was Reggie, tire iron resting on his shoulder, already telling 3 different versions of the same story to 3 different groups of people. There was the grandmother from the 2nd-floor window, whose name turned out to be Miss Odessa, who had reappeared not with a weapon exactly, but with a heavy-duty orange extension cord coiled over one arm, and an expression that suggested she had a plan nobody else had thought of yet. And there was Darius King, 26 years old, who ran the auto shop on the corner and had, in the chaos of the last 20 minutes, backed his tow truck directly into the middle of the street, and was now standing on the flatbed shouting for everybody's attention. "Listen up," Darius yelled, and the crowd of maybe 60 people quieted enough to hear him. "Whatever that thing is up there, it just learned it can get hit. That's it. That's all we proved tonight." "It can get hit, and it bleeds something," somebody shouted from the back. "I saw green on the one Reggie dropped." "Good," Darius said. "Means it ain't invincible. Means it's just better armed than us. We gotta be smarter than armed." Andre stepped up onto the flatbed beside him, looking out at the same faces he'd been cutting hair for over the past 15 years. Faces he knew better than he knew most of his own family. "My granddad used to say something," he said. "Said the city never beat nobody with force. City beats people with patience and paperwork and waiting you out. We don't got their weapons. But we got patience. We got more patience than anybody." Above them, unnoticed by most of the crowd, the third Dominion ship that had not yet landed was making a slow pass over the rooftops, scanning. Its sensors picked up the gathering in the lot, picked up the heat signatures of 60-plus humans clustered together, and flagged it as exactly the kind of organized resistance point that Dominion doctrine said should be neutralized quickly and decisively, before it could grow. What the sensors did not pick up, because no sensor in the history of the Dominion had ever been calibrated to detect it, was the fact that this particular gathering point had a group chat with 400 members, half of whom were already driving toward it from 3 different neighborhoods. Because somebody's cousin had texted somebody else's auntie, and within 20 minutes, the Southside wasn't dealing with 60 people anymore. It was dealing with several hundred and climbing. Commander Vorhane, watching the feed from his command ship, called his strategist forward. "Explain to me," Vorhane said, "how a single demonstration strike has resulted in this." He gestured at the screen, where the crowd in the lot had nearly quadrupled in the time it had taken him to ask the question. "Commander, the local communication network appears to be informal, decentralized. There is no command structure to disrupt because there is no command structure. Then disrupt the gathering directly, a show of force, nothing lethal. We need them to disperse, not martyr themselves." The strategist hesitated. "Sir, may I recommend against direct engagement at this location? Sensor density suggests this is a population center with strong internal cohesion. Previous campaigns have shown that striking cohesive population centers tends to—" "I am aware of the doctrine," Vorhane said sharply. "Execute a perimeter show of force only. Ships low, no weapons discharge. Let them see what they are facing." The second ship descended toward the lot, dropping low enough that its shadow swallowed the entire block, engines screaming just loud enough to rattle teeth. A calculated psychological maneuver that had, on every previous world, sent crowds scattering in terror within seconds. In the lot, the crowd did not scatter. They looked up. A few people booed. Somebody, possibly Reggie, threw a half-empty soda can at the hull, which bounced off harmlessly but drew a genuine cheer from the people standing nearest him. Miss Odessa, extension cord still draped over her arm, looked up at the massive ship hovering less than 200 feet above her head and said, loud enough for the people around her to hear, "I have seen the L train come in lower than that, and I still made it to work on time." Darius, still standing on the flatbed of his tow truck, watched the ship hover and felt something click into place. "Y'all see where it's hovering," he called out. "Right over the old lot, right over the power lines running to the transformer station." Andre followed his gaze. "You thinking what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that thing's running close enough to catch a surge if the transformer blows," Darius said. "I'm thinking my shop's got a generator rig I built 3 winters ago that could push a spike through those lines if we wired it right." "That's insane," Andre said. "You got a better idea?" Andre looked up at the ship, then at the crowd behind him, hundreds of people now, armed with bats and tire irons and folding chairs and absolutely no formal plan, and found that he did not, in fact, have a better idea. "Get your rig," Andre said. "I'll get bodies on the transformer station. Whatever's about to happen, it's about to happen tonight." Above them, the hovering ship held its position exactly where Darius had said it would, engines roaring, lights sweeping the crowd below. Completely unaware that the next 90 minutes were going to determine whether the Drevoth Dominion's 11-world winning streak survived contact with a Southside auto mechanic and a stretch of municipal power line that the city had been promising to upgrade for 6 years. Commander Vorhain watched the crowd refuse to disperse, watched the numbers keep climbing on his screen, and felt the diagnostic flag in his visor flash a third time. This time it did not clear at all. Darius King's auto shop generator rig had been built for one purpose: keeping the lights on during the kind of Southside blackouts that the city took its sweet time fixing. It was a Frankenstein assembly of salvaged industrial parts, 2 repurposed truck alternators, a bank of car batteries wired in series, and enough jumper cable to circle the block twice. Darius had built it himself over 3 winters, mostly out of spite toward a power company he felt had never once shown up on time. He had never imagined it would be aimed at a spaceship. "You sure about the math on this?" Andre asked, crouched beside him near the transformer station while 24 people formed a loose human chain stretching cable from the shop to the junction box. "I'm sure about the principle," Darius said, which was not quite the same thing, and they both knew it. "That ship's running close enough to the lines that if we push enough of a surge through the grid right as it passes over, it's gonna eat some of that feedback whether it wants to or not. Their hull's gotta have some kind of electrical system, everything does. And if you're wrong, then we blew a transformer for nothing and the lights go out on King Drive for a week. Which frankly would not be the worst thing that's happened to this block tonight." Above them, the hovering ship continued its slow, deliberate sweep, lights raking the crowd. Engines a steady wall of sound. Commander Vorhain had ordered no weapons fire, just presence, just pressure, just the overwhelming visual fact of an alien warship sitting directly over their heads. On any of his previous 11 worlds, that pressure alone had been enough to break a crowd's nerve within 10 minutes. The crowd below was now closer to 400 people, and instead of breaking, they were singing. It started with one woman near the back, somebody's church choir voice rising up over the noise of the engines, picking the kind of old gospel hymn that this neighborhood had been singing through fires and funerals and floods for generations, the kind of song that didn't need permission to spread. Within 30 seconds, 200 voices had picked it up, not in perfect unison, not rehearsed. Just loud and defiant, and absolutely unwilling to be drowned out by an engine that had silenced entire planets. Vorhain stood in the command ship watching the audio readout spike, watching 400 unarmed humans drown out his ship's engines with their own voices, and for the first time in his career. He did not know what order to give next. "Sir," his lieutenant said, "the cable team has reached the junction box." "What cable team?" On the ground, Miss Odessa had appointed herself foreman of the operation without being asked. Directing people to hold the line taut, checking the splice connections with the same brisk efficiency she'd once used running the kitchen at a church that fed 200 people every Sunday. "Don't you let that slip," she told a teenager holding a coupling joint. "I held tighter connections than this braiding my granddaughter's hair." Darius reached the junction box, popped the housing, and started wiring the rig directly into the grid feed with hands that were, despite his earlier confidence, shaking just slightly. "On my signal," he called out. "Everybody not on the cable line, get back." The crowd parted instinctively, the singing never stopping, just shifting in volume as people moved. Above them, the second Dominion ship banked into another low pass, engines screaming directly over the transformer station, exactly where Darius needed it to be. "Now," Darius shouted, and slammed the rig's main switch closed. The surge that tore through the grid was not, by any reasonable engineering standard, supposed to work. It was crude, improvised, built from parts never designed to carry that kind of load, and it should have simply blown the transformer and left the block dark for a week, exactly as Darius had warned. Instead, the feedback found something it wasn't supposed to find: an electromagnetic resonance signature bleeding off the Dominion ship's hull. An energy field the Drevoth had never once needed to shield against, because no species they'd previously conquered had grid infrastructure aggressive enough to interact with it. The surge climbed the field like a static shock looking for ground, and the ship systems, built to repel plasma fire and kinetic impacts, had absolutely no defense against an improvised lightning bolt screaming up out of a Chicago power grid. The ship lurched sideways, lights flickering through every visible panel, engines coughing in a way that engines built by a galaxy-spanning empire were never, ever supposed to cough. The crowd's singing broke into screaming, but not the kind of screaming that came from fear. It was the sound 400 people make when something they built with their own hands actually works. "It's dropping," someone screamed. "Look at IT, it's dropping." Inside the ship, alarms that had never once activated in 11 campaigns lit up across every console simultaneously. Vorhane grabbed the command rail as the deck tilted beneath him. "Report," he bellowed. "Power systems compromised across 3 decks," his lieutenant shouted back, fighting to stay upright. "Commander, I do not understand the vector of attack. There is no weapon signature. This is..." He checked his readout twice, as if expecting it to change. "This is civilian electrical infrastructure." "That is not possible," Vorhane said. Outside in the lot, the ship's engines screamed back to a kind of stability, catching itself 30 feet above the rooftops before it could fully crash. But the damage was done. Visible to every phone camera pointed up at it, panels scorched black, one whole side trailing smoke into the Chicago sky. The crowd's cheer was loud enough to rattle windows 3 blocks away. Andre grabbed Darius by the shoulders, both of them grinning like men who had just watched a lottery ticket come in. "You did it. You actually did it. I told you everything's got an electrical system," Darius said, breathless, already moving toward the rig to check for a second charge. But 200 feet above them, the wounded ship was not retreating. It was venting smoke, dropping altitude in a controlled descent rather than a crash, and a panel along its underside was beginning, slowly and ominously, to slide open. Vorhane's voice crackled out over every device on the block at once, the comm gone from his translator now, replaced with something sharper. "This world has demonstrated capability beyond projection," he said. "Doctrine is suspended. Deploy ground forces. Full engagement authorized." On the ramp of the smoking ship, soldiers began to assemble in numbers the Southside had not yet seen, and somewhere in the crowd. Miss Odessa set down her extension cord, looked at the gathering force descending toward her block, and said the only thing that made sense to say. "Well," she said, "I guess we're not done yet." Full engagement looked from the ground like every door on the block opening at once. 20 soldiers came down the smoking ship's ramp in tight formation. Weapons lived this time, no demonstration shots, no calculated restraint. Commander Vorhane had abandoned the doctrine that had won him 11 worlds, because 11 worlds had never once required him to fight a crowd that sang louder than his engines and built lightning out of spare alternator parts. Whatever this was, it was going to end with overwhelming force immediately before it could spread any further than this one neighborhood. It had already spread. By the time the soldiers' boots hit the cracked asphalt of the lot, the crowd facing them wasn't 400 people anymore. It was the entire surrounding blocks, people who had been watching the live stream's Marcus, and a dozen others had been running for the last hour. People who had grabbed whatever was closest and started walking, driving, running toward the one place in the city where something was actually happening. Southside, Westside, neighborhoods that didn't always agree on much, all converging on the same 6-block radius, because the one thing that united every single person in that crowd was a flat refusal to watch their own block get pushed around without doing something about it. Andre Pierce stood near the front line, clippers still jammed in his apron pocket, a folding chair gripped in both hands like a shield, and looked at the wall of armored soldiers leveling weapons at a crowd of unarmed civilians, and made a decision that would be argued about in barbershops for years afterward. "Spread out," he yelled. "Don't bunch up. Don't give 'em one target." The crowd scattered into a loose, chaotic formation, not retreating, just refusing to be an easy shot. Flowing around parked cars and porches, and the burned-out husk of an old bus stop shelter. Exactly the kind of unpredictable urban movement that Drevoth tactical training had never once accounted for, because no world the Dominion had previously conquered had a population this comfortable, moving through its own streets at speed in the dark. The soldiers opened fire, plasma bolts tearing through the night air, scorching brick and asphalt, and the crowd kept moving, ducking behind cars, behind dumpsters, behind the low brick wall that ran along the edge of the lot. Reggie went down hard behind a parked Buick, not hit, just diving for cover with the speed of a man who had clearly done this kind of thing before, tire iron still in his fist. Tony, still bleeding from the glass cut on his arm, grabbed two teenagers by their collars and shoved them behind his own car before they could run straight into the open line of fire. And then turned bat raised and charged the nearest soldier with a fury that had nothing left to do with a hand-painted sign, and everything to do with the fact that this soldier had just shot at a 14-year-old. The soldier never saw the second attack coming. While it focused on Tony's bat, Miss Odessa came around the far side, swinging the heavy coil of extension cord like a whip, wrapping it around the soldier's helmet, and yanking with the kind of strength that nobody who had ever watched her braid hair, or fold laundry, or hold a church kitchen together through 20 years of Sundays would have ever suspected she had. The soldier went down between them, helmet half-torn, disoriented, and 3 more residents piled on before it could rise again. Up in the command ship, Vorhain watched the feed in something that, on his species, would have been called dread. If dread had ever been a feeling, the Drevoth Dominion's command structure had needed a word for before tonight. "Sir," the strategist said, voice tight, "ground forces report 60% engagement efficiency. This is below every projected threshold. They are not fighting like a population," Vorhain snapped. "They are fighting like family. Pull back the eastern flank, push the western line toward the auto shop. Cut off their supply point." But Darius King's auto shop had already been emptied of everything useful the moment the first ship had come down. And what the soldiers found waiting for them when they reached it was not supplies, but Darius himself, standing in the open garage bay with the rebuilt remains of his generator rig. A second jury-rig charge wired straight into a salvaged car battery bank, aimed not at a transformer this time, but directly at the approaching line of soldiers. "Y'all keep walking toward my shop," Darius said, mostly to himself, flipping the switch. The discharge wasn't lightning this time, just a brutal electromagnetic pulse with a fraction of the range, but at close quarters it didn't need range. It tore through the soldiers' armor systems, dropping 3 of them where they stood, joints locking. Helmets flashing error displays in a language none of them had ever expected a human garage to be capable of producing. The remaining soldiers hesitated, just for a second, just long enough for Andre's group to flank them from the side street. Folding chairs and bats, and one genuinely terrifying woman with a rolling pin, closing the gap before the Drevoth line could reform. Vorhain watched soldier after soldier go down to civilians, to garage equipment, to a coordinated chaos that had no command structure and somehow needed none, and made the call that no Dominion commander had ever been forced to make in the Empire's recorded history. "All units," Vorhain said, voice flat with something that was not quite defeat yet but was getting close, "fall back to the ships." "Immediate withdrawal. Sir, withdrawal contradicts." "I am aware of what it contradicts, Lieutenant," Vorhain said. "I have also reviewed 11 prior campaigns, and none of them prepared me for this. We are leaving." On the ground, the soldiers began retreating toward the smoking ship, dragging their fallen with them, and the crowd, exhausted, bruised, several of them bleeding, watched the wall of gray armor pull back across the lot under a hail of thrown bricks, and one extremely well-aimed folding chair, and understood, with the kind of certainty that didn't need a press conference to confirm it, that they had just won. Marcus, phone still somehow recording after 2 hours, turned the camera toward his own face for the first time all night, sweat-streaked, grinning, breathless. "Darnell," he said into the speaker, "you watching this?" "Bro," Darnell's voice came back, barely audible over the noise. "The whole world is watching this." The ships lifted off just before 2 in the morning, trailing smoke, and the kind of silence that comes after something enormous finally stops making noise. Commander Vorhain watched the Southside shrink beneath him on the rear display, the lot still crowded with people who had refused to disperse even after the engagement ended. Some of them tending to the wounded, most of them simply standing together in the dark, because that was what this block did after anything happened, good or bad. It gathered. His final report to the Dominion High Council, filed 6 days later from orbit, would become, against his own wishes, one of the most studied documents in the Empire's modern military history. He did not dress it up, he did not soften it. "Population density alone does not explain the failure," he wrote. 11 prior campaigns succeeded against forces with superior weapons and inferior cohesion. This population had inferior weapons, and a cohesion this command has no precedent for. They organize without orders. They share information faster than our own communications array could intercept it. They treat damage to their structures as a personal insult, requiring immediate and specific retaliation. They converted civilian electrical infrastructure into a viable weapon within 90 minutes of first contact, using equipment never designed for that purpose. Recommend this region be flagged for indefinite non-engagement. The Council asked for clarification on one specific line in his report. Vorhain provided it without elaboration. He had described in his notes a single moment partway through the retreat when he had watched, through a damaged external sensor, an elderly human woman calmly coiling up a length of orange electrical cable in the middle of an active war zone, the same cable that had nearly brought down his ship. Treating the entire encounter with the unbothered efficiency of someone finishing a chore, she had simply expected to need to do that night. He had no word in his own language for what that woman represented. The closest translation his linguistic database could produce when pressed was simply home field advantage. Back on the ground, the Southside spent the next morning doing what it always did after anything happened. It cleaned up. Tony's daughter, now 28 and living 2 states away, drove through the night the moment she saw the footage, and arrived just after sunrise to find her father sweeping broken glass off the sidewalk in front of the store. The same store, the same sidewalk, like nothing had happened at all. Except for the new sign leaning against the wall that somebody from the block had already started painting by hand, free of charge, before he'd even asked. Darius King's auto shop became, almost overnight, the subject of 2 government phone calls, one cautious offer from a defense contractor that he turned down without reading past the first paragraph, and approximately 400 new customers who insisted, despite his protests, that he was the only mechanic on the South Side they trusted with their car now. He kept the generator rig. He never explained exactly how it worked to anyone who asked, including, eventually, a very persistent man in a government badge who left without the answer he came for. Andre Pierce finished the haircut he'd left half done the night of the invasion. The customer, a quiet kid named Trevon who hadn't said much through the entire ordeal, sat back down in the chair the following Tuesday like nothing unusual had happened. Because by Tuesday, on the South Side, not much was treated as unusual anymore. Andre picked up his clippers, looked at the half-finished cut in the mirror, and said the line that would end up painted within a month on a mural 3 blocks from his shop. "Told you we'd finish this later," he said. Miss Odessa got a key made to the old lot, the one with the basketball hoops on milk crates, and started organizing a Friday night cookout there that, 18 months later, was still running every single week, rain or clear sky, because she said the block had earned a tradition out of what happened. And she intended to make sure nobody forgot it by letting it slide back into being just an empty lot again. Marcus's footage, all 2 hours and 11 minutes of it, became the single most viewed civilian recording in human history within 72 hours, translated into 41 languages. Studied by governments on every continent that suddenly had very pressing questions about urban defense theory that none of their existing military doctrine had answers for. Marcus never monetized it. He said the only thing he wanted out of the whole night was for Darnell to finally admit the Bulls had a shot. Darnell still hasn't. Whether the Drevoth Dominion ever came back has never been confirmed by anyone with the authority to confirm it, and the South Side, for its part, has never seemed especially worried about the answer either way. The block still gathers on Friday nights. The lot still has its hoops. Tony's new sign, repainted twice now by different hands in the neighborhood, still says the same thing it always said, just with one new line added underneath in smaller letters. The kind of line that reads less like a warning and more like a simple statement of fact for anyone who might be thinking about trying something like this again. "We're still here. Come find out why that's a problem. If this story hit different, you already know what to do. Drop a comment telling us which character you'd want covering your back during an invasion. Hit share if you know somebody who needs to see what real neighborhood loyalty looks like. And subscribe, because the Southside story is not the only one out there waiting to be told."